Well, thank you. This is quite an honor to be here. I've heard so much about this group for the last 3 years since we moved here from Dallas. But just to hear the stories of the different groups and ministries and organizations, nonprofits that are supported is difficult to follow. But this is something that I have been looking forward to for a while. I've been looking forward to talking to a group of realtors. I know you. I don't know all of you personally, but I know what the lifestyle and the life of a realtor is because I've been married to one for 27 years. We have both commented, in fact, she's been doing real estate as long as I've been doing cybersecurity. So we've had quite a number of conversations over the years about how desperately needed cybersecurity is in this industry and this community. And so today, I just want to keep it pretty simple for you. Basically, there's just going to be two parts here. We're going to focus on the hopelessness, and then we're going to transition into some hope. But I do feel that it is very important to really educate everybody on the different trends that are relevant at a macro level, but then also drill down and just be very, very specific to what each of you are dealing with. If you haven't already dealt with it, you will, and the risks associated with that. And then we're going to move into the hopeful side of things. And I put together a cybersecurity playbook for realtors. And so if any of you are interested in this presentation afterwards, come by, see me. I'll be happy to share it with you. But basically there's one page, if you just take anything away from this conversation tonight, one page that you can go back to your businesses and starting tomorrow, maybe not do it yourself, but at least prioritize it and delegate it to somebody to get done because it is doable and it does make a big difference. All right, so these statistics are staggering. According to the FBI, there is more money made in cybercrime than there is in drug trafficking. And I'm going to touch about this at the end, but there is a huge correlation between the victims that are served in the groups that you are funding and cybercrime. Cybercrime is actually what funds a lot of that. Sex trafficking, abuse, etc. And people just find it very difficult to connect the dots and see what it is. But from a small business perspective, 68% of small businesses are hit each year with some sort of cybersecurity attack. 47% of those are ransomware. And I've talked with many, many people on a regular basis who are hit with ransomware. Nobody's immune from it. But what a lot of people don't realize is that what started as a $500 Bitcoin is now up over $100,000 for a ransomware payment. And the average cost of a data breach, if you have to recover from it, get lawyers involved, et cetera, is starting at about $120,000 and can easily go up to $1.2 million. And the impact that that's having on businesses, on individuals, but also just local communities, considering the fact that small businesses represent a large part of our economy, is massive, massive. 37% are getting hit with some sort of very significant financial loss. 25% are filing for bankruptcy, and almost 10% are going out of business. And this is a trend that we've just seen continue to increase in the last 2 years thanks to COVID. So what specifically are lots of different things that the bad guys are out there doing? All kinds of stuff. I mean, the sophistication of these organizations, and I say organizations, I mean they are legitimate, well-run businesses. We're not talking about the script kiddie that I started dealing with 20 years ago when I got into this with the Department of Defense. Most people still think that there's some 18-year-old guy, white male with a hoodie living in his mama's basement doing these attacks, and that's no longer the case. The level of maturity and sophistication in these criminal organizations is unbelievable, really. But there are just three primary types of attacks that I think this group in particular really needs to worry about. Business email compromise, wire fraud, and ransomware. And we're going to talk about each one of these because I want everybody to have at least a good general understanding of what that type of attack looks like. I'm just curious, has anybody in the group that wants to raise their hand and acknowledge dealt with any of these things so far? Yeah? Okay. I know this is difficult to see here, but every year Verizon, yes, the cell phone company, but they also do massive cybersecurity, releases a report called the Data Breach Investigations Report. And this is in the cybersecurity industry, the most widely anticipated report that we geek out on. Verizon basically works with the FBI, they work with Interpol, they work with numerous law enforcement agencies all over the world, and they basically analyze thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of actual cyber breaches. They compile all that information and they put it together. So what used to be a black box is now being brought to the light, and we're able to really address these issues from a prioritized, systemic manner. But what's interesting is the 2022 report just came out 2 weeks ago, and 82% of businesses of breaches experience the human element. And this is key, as we'll talk about, because a lot of people believe that cybersecurity is an IT or technology problem. That's probably the number one myth that I have to bust on a frequent basis. What most people don't understand is that cybersecurity is a human game. There's a real human attacking a real human, and there just happens to be technology in the middle that they use just like any other tool. And so understanding that is really important, and understanding that there's not going to be never has been and never will be, a 100% pure technology solution to make all these problems go away. It's going to require humans. Also, 13% increase in ransomware, more than 5 times combined over the last 5 years increase. And then 62% of all the incidents were from partners, trusted partners, people who they trust. So let's talk about business email compromise. This just came out last month. Public service announcement from the FBI. Business email compromise, the $43 billion scam. I'm kind of surprised that not more people have raised their hands. My guess is that you may be a little bit embarrassed to do that, and that's fine. But we work with companies week after week that get hit with this. In fact, we were working with 4 different companies, unique companies, individual companies on their own, different CEOs last week that all got hit with this. And it's a sobering experience when at 10 o'clock at night, you're on a Zoom call with the CEO and you're walking them through cleaning up their inbox, and you are literally seeing the hacker in their inbox making changes real time, trying to delete your emails because they recognize that they're now working with a cybersecurity company. And that happens over and over and over, and it happens like that. In fact, the first CEO got popped on a Monday, and by Wednesday, 3 other companies have been completely infiltrated as well. And this is just happening over and over and over. In fact, the way it's happening is primarily through 3 different areas. Email-based phishing, so the prevalence of social media just makes it ridiculously easy for anybody to do a level of intelligence gathering that used to be limited to 3-letter agencies. I mean, and the tools that exist that are available on the dark web for free for anybody who doesn't have any intelligence background or even cybersecurity background for that matter, to go scrape all your data, pull it together, create a very, very sophisticated targeted email, launch it to you at just the right time, and have you open it is very, very easy. And this is what leads to the business email compromise attacks, which 77% of organizations faced in 2021, up 65% from 2020. And then there's the spear phishing attacks, and that's where it gets even more sophisticated, more targeted, but it's the low-level hanging fruit that we really want to knock out and get addressed. So I had a really, what I thought was an interesting 4-minute video that was going to take up a quarter of this presentation, and it was called The Homeless Homeowner. Has anybody seen that? No? So about 3 or 4 years ago, the FBI, wire fraud, you guys are fully aware of it as top producers. I'm not talking about anything new, but about 3 or 4 years ago, it was becoming such a bad deal that the FBI commissioned a cybersecurity company called Ninjio to create this really good little video. In fact, I had it on the slides up until earlier this morning when I showed it to my wife, and I thought it was going to be the emotional grab to get everybody, and she said, yeah, that's a good video, but she said, these are sophisticated real estate agents. This has been ingrained into their soul for the last 3 to 5 years. She said, you should talk about it, but you shouldn't really spend that much time on a silly little video. Point taken. I listened to her like I usually do. But what I did find is that regardless of the fact that this has been drilled into your subconscious all these years, something's not working. This continues to evolve and be a bigger and bigger problem. In fact, in 2018, there was $150 million lost in the real estate and rental losses because of wire fraud. In 2020, this increased to $213 million, and my guess would be that's even more than that. And despite the fact that the Coalition to Stop Real Estate Wire Fraud was put together, these attacks have only continued to increase from 11,300 in 2018 to 13,600 in 2020. All right, so ransomware. This is also at the top of concern for most of our clients. This is in fact how we typically get a lot of clients, because they either get hit with ransomware once, twice, or 3 times, and then they finally say, enough is enough, something's not working, obviously I don't have a control over this, and I'm tired of being a victim. And so this is just a scary stat that every 11 seconds somebody is a ransomware victim. And what's even scarier is that the bad guys in certain industries, like the ones we work with, law firms, CPAs, real estate, insurance companies, anybody that has a lot of sensitive information, has realized over the last few years that a lot of those folks take the accessibility of their data very, very serious, and they typically have multiple backups. And so as these hackers have been coming in and increasing their attacks and encrypting data, and realizing that their victims are able to roll back and recover fairly quickly, they figured out how to do what's called a double and triple ransomware extortion attack. So instead of just going in through a phishing email typically and locking up all your databases, all your CRMs, et cetera, and holding you ransom, they will first exfiltrate all that very juicy, sensitive client information out to the dark web, and they will hold you ransom and threaten to release it, which there are many, many high-profile cases where that has happened, unfortunately, especially with law firms and celebrities. We have had cases of different CPAs who have had these type of attacks, and they thought that they recovered from the ransomware portion, only to realize that a lot of their clients actually were having fraudulent claims submitted on their behalf for different insurance benefits and different type of government subsidies. And they were the common link. And so when I think about realtors, I know that things have changed over the years, that supposedly we're not supposed to be having as much sensitive customer information. But I am fairly confident, and somebody could challenge me on this, but having been married to a realtor for 27 years and being the family IT guy and looking at the computers and the type of data that exists on there, I'm fairly confident that there's still a decent amount of juicy information in your inboxes, on your devices, and on your computers and cell phones. And even if they're not, there is one thing that hackers would love from each of you, and that's your database. Because if they can get your database, and they can act on your behalf as their trusted real estate agent, whether it's talking to a mortgage company, a title company, a bank, a lawyer, or a high net worth individual, they can do a lot of damage. And that's exactly how the last 4 companies that I mentioned we dealt with last week got compromised. It was through the network and it was through the trust. And all they had was access to email. So it doesn't always have to be the juicy, sensitive social security numbers or bank information that you may or may not have on your computers and devices. But just that database is very, very important. All right, so enough about what we call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt in cybersecurity, and the hopelessness. Let's transition into some sort of hope. And this is the slide I was talking about at the beginning, that if you just rip this out of the deck, took it, handed it off to your IT person or somebody that is able to relatively decent degree of technological expertise, go implement this. This is very, very doable. And I'm just going to go through these. I'm not going to try to bore you with each one of these, but I want everybody to hopefully understand why these are so important. Because if you do this, you are almost bulletproof. Now, I use bulletproof as a very intentional term, because it doesn't mean that you're not going to get shot at or you're not going to get attacked. Everybody does, and everybody will be at some point. But hopefully, if you have implemented these things, or even just the top 3 or 4, you are going to be in a much, much better position to be resilient for your businesses, and also resilient from lawsuits from clients who may come after you because they think that you were the ones that lost their information. So the first one is simply having a policy. This doesn't have to be overly complex or complicated. In fact, with most of these, with the right expertise, you could actually get these in place for a company with less than 20 employees in 90 minutes. That is the goal. But having a policy and an incident response plan on who you're going to call when and if something happens is really, really important. But unfortunately, I've never seen a policy or a plan that really works until it's been tested. And so testing it on a regular basis is very important. And then once you have that in place, obviously educating your employees and testing them regularly is important too. These are all things that every single Fortune 500 company, like the one I used to work with, every government agency has been doing for decades. It's just that because small businesses are the new attack, a trend that started about 3 to 4 years ago, these best practices are now being rolled down to the small players and the small businesses, because most of the time they are the weakest link. So humans, as we saw with the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, are often the weakest link. And so having some sort of education in place, this qualifies that for you guys, and testing it through phishing testing is extremely important. And then this, if I was only going to do one thing or recommend one thing, is implement multi-factor authentication. The scenarios I just talked about with the companies that we see get hit all the time, get hit with business email compromise primarily because their credentials are stolen. And there are a million different ways that your login and your password could get stolen. I mean, trying to hide your email address for this group is ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. But your password should be. And unfortunately, if you're using static passwords, which most people do, and a lot of people use the same password for multiple accounts, and I see a lot of people smiling, and you're not supposed to raise your hand, Cherise. You're not doing that anymore, right? We talked about that multiple times. is the absolute way that hackers get into your inbox. And you can just imagine the devastation that occurs if somebody has your email and they're able to log in from anywhere in the world, anytime they want, to your Microsoft 365 or G Suite Google accounts and do all kinds of crazy things. The next one is securing your computer. So 2 things to do here. Just make sure auto updates are installed. This is a 5-minute exercise that whoever is doing your IT could turn on. You could turn it on. You could literally click on that link, watch that, and it would take you all of about 5 minutes to do it. Super, super simple. But a lot of people don't do it. The next thing is antivirus. So the common joke in our industry is that the legacy solutions like the McAfee's, the Nortons, the Bitdefenders, hopefully you're not using Russian-based Kaspersky, are completely useless. At best, they may catch 30% of the bad stuff. They're really a false sense of security. And so there are much, much better solutions out on the market. One in particular we recommend is called SentinelOne. My business partner, Hank Bonner, retired Navy Admiral, and I both feel that this is currently the best solution out there. But that's not all. You really need to have somebody doing the exact same thing that the Fortune 500 companies, the governments, everybody else has been at this level of cybersecurity maturity for a while is doing, which is you need to have somebody looking at these alerts and monitoring these things 24/7. And that's difficult to do in-house. I understand that. This isn't your business. Staffing up 12 people at a minimum to monitor your computers for cybersecurity attacks and hackers is probably not something that's in your budget. And that's why this is something that's best outsourced to a managed service provider or a managed security service provider. And then the last one is securing your collaboration. So if you're using Microsoft 365 or G Suite, which from what I've seen, most people have transitioned to the cloud. That's great. I highly encourage it. But most people think that they're automatically getting more secure or becoming more secure simply by doing that. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Both of those companies I mentioned, including Amazon, have pretty amazing security features available to you, but they don't turn them on because they don't want to break things and they don't want to be your IT provider. But they do exist. That's the good news. The bad news is that somebody has to do it for you. So whether you have somebody in-house, we joke his name is Steve, because the first 3 law firms that we talked to here in Colorado Springs, when we asked who their IT person was, his name literally happened to be Steve, could go in and do this. The links to do those are right there. It's doable. Basically what you're trying to do there is just a periodic audit of making sure that employees who haven't been with the company for the last 5 years aren't still logging into your systems and accessing your CRM and your emails and things of that nature. And believe it or not, that happens quite a bit. And then also just beefing up the security of your email so that there's a higher level of anti-phishing and anti-malware in place before it actually hits your inbox. And then there's a great company that happens to be here in town called BotDoc. And I know if you do any business with Integrity Bank, you've probably used this service before. But if, in the rare case that you do have to transport any sensitive information, I would highly, highly, highly recommend using something like BotDoc. It's super easy to use from the client perspective. It works whether they're communicating with you through text or through email or through a web browser, but it basically, regardless of the format that's used, encrypts all that sensitive information and makes sure that everybody on both sides of the communication string are protected. Whew, so that's a lot. That's the one slide. Once that's in place, which again, it is very possible to do this, and I'm not kidding. I understand that a lot of that probably went over Everybody said, and that's fine. I completely get that, but it is something that can be done, and it can be done cost effectively. And once it is, it really allows you to move from defense to offense. And this is where we really flip the script on cybersecurity, right? We start having the ability to use it as a competitive differentiator, which I believe is going to become more and more important as these attacks rise. Any of your clients that has ever gotten hit with identity theft in a meaningful way is going to be very shell-shocked when they're doing business with you. So if you can have these things in place, document them, and proactively present them and communicate to your customers on what you're doing in the case that you deal with any of their sensitive information, but also how they deal with Bill's organization, how they deal with banks, et cetera, as part of that process, is really big in establishing trust, but also in differentiating yourselves from the competition. And so then the last thing is, if you're doing all these things, which you should, just market it. Create some little videos. People are actually interested in cybersecurity these days, especially if they've been hit recently or somebody that they know has. And then lastly, this allows us to achieve what I believe cybersecurity is all about, which is freedom of movement. And there's two parts to this equation when I talk about cybersecurity being freedom of movement. Just like having a good insurance plan, having a good trusted advisor as part of the journey you're on, having these best practices in place just gives you a huge amount of confidence to navigate downtimes that we're maybe getting ready to go into, navigate issues that your clients are facing that may or may not have to do with the transaction that you're helping them with. But there's also another part of this which has to do with the human side and has to do with some of the organizations that are here in this room and are supported by this group. I am extremely passionate about using cybersecurity, not to be a means unto itself, because I don't believe it is, but to be a bridge or a pathway from one place where somebody may be stuck to somewhere else that they want or need to go. Globally, there are 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs. That's part of the problem. When there's this much money, we have a supply and a demand issue. It's economics 101. In the US alone, there are 600,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs. The second misconception about cybersecurity that I have to bust all the time is the fact that you don't need a 4-year computer science college degree to get into cybersecurity to be making starting salaries of $74,000 on up. You can do it in high school. In fact, we are working with high schools here in Colorado, in Peyton, in Calhoun, in Pennsylvania, in Texas. We're also working with transitioning veterans. We're also working with college students. But now we're also starting to work with nonprofits, which was always our intention 2.5 years ago when we launched ForceNow, was to use cybersecurity as a means and a vehicle to get to someplace better. And so I'm just gonna put this plug in here for Suze because we were talking about it earlier. She happens to have a survivor that is probably a very, very good candidate for getting to the next level in her life and in her career. And we would love to help her out. There are some costs associated with that. We're talking about easily less than $1,000. But if anybody is interested in helping with those costs being for the curriculum and the online courses that this lady would need to take to be able to start working with us on her own time, whenever she wants, wherever she wants, as much as she wants, and be building up her resume, leading towards a high-paying, stable career in cybersecurity. Please talk with either of us. Well, actually, don't talk with her afterwards. So, thank you so much for your time. I think we're 2 minutes over. If you have any questions, I'll be sticking around, happy to meet with you, and more than happy to share this presentation with you. Thank you.